Hello, my name is Mill Williams, and this slide deck is a narrated slide deck about 6 positions I take in respect of IT tech, specifically IT tech. And we'll find out more about why I'm focusing on IT tech as the slide deck develops. This is what I look like when I'm at my happiest, I guess. It was Stockholm, Sweden last Christmas, that is to say 2023. A forest near the home of someone I know. What I really like about tech, though, is repurposing things to make humans more important. As I said in the previous slide, it's IT tech I'm focusing on. And I think this is because I think as it impacts us at so many levels, in so many places, work and play, leisure time, and some really driven stuff, it's where most could be delivered if we did it differently. And for the past 30 years at least, where, in my opinion, most damage has been done. Change is inevitable, but its nature rarely is. Things happen because they tell us they have to happen, because change is inevitable. But we rarely get to choose the nature of that change, how it happens, why it happens, to understand why it happens, and so forth. And I've been writing and posting a lot on LinkedIn, and I don't know if people fully understand the things that I see clearly. So I thought I'd do a simpler approach this time around on this narrated slide deck. Just talk about 6 positions I take, things I've been talking about over the years since about 2016 onwards, when I first went to Dublin. I'd like to explain how I use language in those contexts, how I sometimes change the connotations of the language I use, but always in order to describe new ways of doing things. I'm also going to give reasons why I believe we must do these things that I propose. These are the 6 positions I take in respect of IT tech. Position 1 is something I call Mill's theorem. Position 2 talks about industrialization versus automation. Position 3 is about what I've called human primacy versus machine primacy, in particular in the context of surveillance and battlefield operations. Position 4 describes why I think bad guys are creative and why we are not. Position 5 is on secrecy and why we need it again, and it has something to do with position 4 and in ways the other positions too. And finally, why in position 6 I conclude that we must focus first on stopping the bad. There are arguments that any new kind of platform, especially one which promotes a kind of digital pencil and paper, that is to say a secret environment of the most secretive, to enhance our ability to think creatively. There is an argument to say that we should apply this immediately to all problems, big problems in our society. Things like climate change, for example, which has become climate boiling in the past 12 months. But I'm inclined, on the back of recent events in generative AI, to conclude quite firmly that we must be very careful before we indiscriminately launch on the world technologies which could upturn inappropriately and unhelpfully what we do as technologists and thinkers and imagineers. Position 1 I've called Mill's theorem. It might sound a bit portentous, I know, but let's just call it that. I'll read this version of Mill's theorem word for word. In an almost infinitely malleable digital world, if I, with my limited intellect and financial resources, can imagine a brand new way of committing crime, loopholes, that is legal societal harm, also called xemiology, and other ways of acting in bad faith, someone with far more resources and intelligence will already have imagined and implemented the same. Ergo, in order to prove that what I imagine in digital exists, I only have to imagine it. I don't need to evidence it in more traditional ways. So what are the implications of Mill's theorem? Well, I think the implications are that the most important ones are that human imagination and creativity drive the deepest kind of digital. Machine equivalents, in the meantime, only produce more of the same, though at a massive scale, industrially and so forth, it's true. My second position I've called industrialization versus automation. Industrialization may have baggage for you, individually speaking, I mean, of a slightly negative kind. We had the Industrial Revolution and so forth. But it is used more recently in terms of Industry 4. The idea is that, and 5 even, the idea is that we begin to negotiate the interface between human and machine in more interesting ways, I think. Automation, I find less interesting. Now, the reason I find automation less interesting is partly not because I undervalue the need for us to use automation at all. Part of my thinking is based on thinking in arts-based ways, arts-based thinking patterns. So I find it very interesting to think in arts-based ways. Industrialization allows me to do that. Automation doesn't. In fact, automation used widely inhibits our capacity to think in creative ways. We'll examine this idea as we proceed through the slide deck. So IT tech in particular, much more than any other kind of technology, advocates automation. It believes the sheer power of repeating on past patterns, analyzing what has happened before, and then multiplying up hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of times to assure we know what's next. That's enough to be the very human alternative, which I call industrialization. Not the Industrial Revolution, dark mills, cotton stuff, and all the rest. Not that. A different idea. We'll see a couple of examples below. Industrializing humans back into workplace relevance involves using tools that enhance our innate curiosity and imagination. The things we do when we think things from scratch, brand new stuff, which we didn't even realize ourselves we were capable of. The kind of brainstorming wonder of stumbling across knowledge maybe the world hasn't seen before, never mind ourselves. So we can surprise ourselves when we think industrially. We don't surprise ourselves. No part of the process is surprising in terms of automation. That's my position. I'm open to a debate, but I think generally speaking, that's true. Examples of automation, in my view, from my position 2, is that everything IT tech does these days is automation. No one is really caring to advocate anything but this. Examples of what I would call industrialization, where the machine is designed to make the human more important and better at what they do, not less important and practically irrelevant to what is done, would include, for example, a surgeon operating more accurately with robotic and laser support, or a singer magnifying their voice with a microphone. A microphone allows a singer to sing quietly and yet be heard, and therefore much more expressively, much more sensually, which they couldn't do without a microphone. That person is more of a singer with a microphone and can do many more things. Film director the same, expanding there in the audience's eye with a camera. So my position 3 in relation to IT tech brings in the concept of human primacy versus machine primacy. And this might be painful for some people, especially if you're in the business of security. But I do feel after all this time, I've been talking about this for a year, 2 years, 3 years maybe, easing myself into this particular concept. When we do something well, we deserve the praise. But when we don't, we ought to be honest enough to say we need to do it better. So this is what human primacy versus machine primacy is all about. In my mind, it's about 3 events over the past 2 decades. I have a master in international criminal justice, and this master provoked me into thinking these things. Maybe provoke is right, but it's not my intention to provoke others. I'm not here to be a provocation. I'm just here to identify the truth. So 9/11 showed us all those terrible years ago how nonconformist bad actors were capable of imagining and implementing a highly unsuspected kind of crime. And how did they do it? They used machines as extensions of their evil, of their humanity, their inhumanity. Machines as extensions of their inhumanity. Putin's Russia, in his invasion of Ukraine, is showing that nonconformist thought, it outplays the brute force of war. What I'm saying here is that I'm not sure that Ukraine is primarily about Ukrainian territory. Its pain and its delivery is on Ukrainian territory, and a lot of really cruel, unheard of. I honestly, I don't have words for it. I went through this in Croatia in 1991, 92, the early 90s. My mother's Croatian. So it does resonate a lot what's happening in Ukraine. But I'm not sure that Putin plays at a much deeper level. He's a spy master. He still is. He's a chess player, I'm sure. He's much more interested in using things like Ukraine to dislocate many more items, many more things on the table than simply invading a country, a sovereign country he wants to be part of, what his perception of Russia is, which is basically the Soviet Union we knew and really didn't like all those years ago. I think that he uses these kinds of events to dislocate the good that Western democracy could still offer the world. He has us on the back foot all the time. Whenever we settled down after pandemic and said, right, we can start again. And then along comes Ukraine and before pandemic, Crimea and so forth. He plays a longitudinal game, and he is a nonconformist thinker. In the bad sense of nonconformity, he will think up things that none of us would dare to. How could we stop him? How could we? At least, how could we anticipate him? And finally, if I had said before last October, number 1 and number 2, you would have said, okay, number 1 was an unacceptable act, but something that stood out, a standout thing in history. And then when I said Putin's Russia, you say that's a completely different matter. It's not what we're about here. This is something different. But last October, Hamas's attack on all the peoples of the region, as it aimed to change the historical narrative of what people feel about Jewish history, about the oppression that all countries in the world have imposed on the Jews throughout history. That, I'm sure, was part of the game. But it wasn't only that they were thinking at levels, at terrifying longitudinal, historical, into the future levels of how can we make sure no one will be on Israel's side. It wasn't just that. All of that happened in probably the most machine-surveilled space on the planet. Human primacy versus machine primacy. 9/11, Putin's dislocation of everything the West and related democracies hold most dear, including Ukraine. And then Hamas's attack on all the peoples of the region, not just to cause physical injury, but also to change a long-term narrative and a Second World War memory, maybe to ensure that it receded forever. So, I've taken 3 slides from another slide deck here and inserted them into this one. This is just a little story, an anecdote, which somebody told me whilst I was in a cultural centre in Chester, UK, a place called Storyhouse. And he told me, this gentleman told me, how the Ukrainians used their capacity for creative thinking to destroy Russian tanks with a simple drone. But not only that, to count the drones out and then engineer a process which counted the drones back. Because the Ukrainians don't have the luxury of unlimited financial resources. Their people are really dear to them, as most military will bear witness to, and most civilizations, most citizenries, and democracies will bear witness to. But here, in warfare, where the resources are limited, you have to be savvy about counting your machines back, as well as counting your people back. Okay, so they've designed, they've reshaped, they've re-engineered slightly their drones so that it not only ensures they can attack it to the extent that its occupants jump out and run for their lives. The Ukrainians also knew or discovered or realized that on jumping out of the tank and running for your lives, the last thing you consider doing is shutting the turret lid. Now the shells are stored around this turret, so I was told by this gentleman in Storyhouse, in Russian tanks. So knowing this fact, they use their intuition, they use their imagination, they use their capacity to get dirty with the tech, in this case mechanical, electromechanical tech. And they basically devised a procedure and connected, attached to every drone that attacked a Russian tank, a grenade below the drone. So grenade plus procedure. They would hover over the hole thus left by the open turret. They'd drop a grenade into it, and then whooshing the drone up vertically, they would ensure the ultimate destruction of the tank and the safe return of the valuable drone to base. That's when you can get dirty with the tech. That's what you can do when you can tweak. And it was only able to happen because of the multiple reflections that took place prior to the procedure being invented. Personal, and therefore privately intuitive, and then connecting in teams across specialisms to deliver a simple evolutionary set of procedures with revolutionary impact. My position 4 describes how bad guys are creative, but it also explores why we are not. Now, people say the world is full of beautifully creative things. I'm not sure that they are as creative as they could be. And I'm not sure that it's been satisfactorily answered, the question that I'm now going to pose. I started posing this question 2 or 3 years ago, and I've never had a satisfactory answer since then. Question being, why are human beings the strongest link in criminality and considered by the industry, by the security industry, and therefore by everyone, as being the weakest link in security? Why has that happened? Why does nobody answer it? So, bad guys are creative and why we are not. What does this one say? It's not the being creative that makes you bad. We were all born creative. But the older we get, maybe this is what's happening. We feel creativity has a number of risks. Creativity is always viewed with suspicion by people who naturally conform. And we need conformists. Actually, we do. They make our societies operate according to beneficial rules and regulations. We know the kind of people who do that, and they do it very usefully. But sometimes conformism perpetuates itself beyond utility. And if there's nothing saying, actually, no, the solution that comes out of conformist circles is always just more of the same. More managers, more laws, more surveillance, less trust. Now, bad guys, in my view, are creative because they don't care what the rest of society thinks. And it's that freedom, not caring not caring about what other people say. It's that freedom to think is what creates new thought. New thought only comes out of going beyond the pale. Bad people will do it whatever we do. But what happens if we suddenly discover that our society has driven us to make it impossible, practically impossible, for us to think as creatively as the bad guys? We cannot fight them if we cannot think as freely as them. Yes, we need conforming people to ensure the rules and laws are applied correctly. This is true. But we need non-conforming people in the first place to discover the crimes that are happening in a modern digital universe. That is to say, we need people who are legitimately non-conforming. Not taken out of the criminal world and given a salary. People who are legitimately non-conforming because they have learned to be, using a technology and a series of platforms that enable them to recover their own curiosity and capacity for original thinking delivered. Original unpredictable thinking, but delivered predictably. So what can realizing all of a sudden that you have the freedom to think do for a whole bunch of human endeavors? In the context of the battlefield, in the context of Ukraine versus Putin's Russia, which is what we've already discussed, again, the next three slides are pulled from one of the cognitive warfare slide decks I've done previously. It can do these things. It's not realizing exactly what the enemy is capable of in a warfare of cognitive tools, of cognitive weapons. It's not there to make you paranoid, to think, oh my God, I can't even go for a coffee because there's going to be a CCTV that they're going to hack into in order to see where I am and so forth. It's simply to increase your preparedness. It's not to make you afraid, it's to make you careful. It's not to make you reluctant, it's to make you bold. Not to make you passive. It's to ensure you proactively contribute. Just like the Ukrainians with the Russian tanks, that story that I just discussed. To the innovation and development of new procedures that make the difference between a future for us all or a past we only ever look back on wishfully. The thing is that in a world of cognitive warfare, battlefields of that nature, unless we think as creatively as the awfully creative thinkers on that battlefield, our opponents, our enemies, the ones who don't care what their societies think about them, who do go beyond the pale, who do deliver an intuition to the max, if we can't think in similar ways yet maintain at the same time our humanity and our desire for building better worlds, then we won't build better worlds. Their creativity will beat us hands down every single time. And I'm not looking to criticize previous or current practice. Everyone uses the tools we are given to the best of our ability. Sometimes the tools we're only capable of imagining. But physical tools such as rifles and motorized vehicles, they lend themselves always to human interactions, to intuitive insights, to that tinkering, that tweaking, which allows for someone like the Ukrainians to think up a way of blowing up a Russian tank with a simple drone. This is where the problem lies in relation to IT tech, why I focus on IT tech above all in my desire to repurpose modern technology. Current IT tech is surveillance tech. All operating systems have a split between the admin and the user. It didn't used to be like that. Right at the very beginning, before PCs were connected to any other PC or then to the internet and the World Wide Web, those PCs were solitary admin user in one configurations. That was digital pencil and paper. And that created the wondrous things in the early years of IT, in the early years of tech, PC tech. But as soon as we cobbled together the processes and began to connect us all together in the cloud and all of that, IT tech with its admin, whether machine or human, became a surveillance tech, even if not by design, but it did. And we never feel as free to think using surveillance tech as we do with pencil and paper. So in cognitive warfare, we will always equally find ourselves at a disadvantage. This is really the point of probably the whole presentation. Cognitive warfare, where there are so many different layers and levels, both geopolitical and battlefield, both in a European Parliament and on the streets of ordinary communities, where ordinary citizens find themselves coming up against a global embedded criminality, a global and local embedded criminality. It changes our needs, all of that. It must change our IT tech. Otherwise, we will continue to labour under a severe disadvantage when we wish to fight that embedded global and local criminality. So, it's not only firming up the ability of our conformists in society so that they can deliver structured, fair and resilient societies themselves, communities and citizens all, we also need to create technologies in the philosopher Foucault's usage of that term. That is to say, not just tech, but also new legal figures and legislation which are able to protect us from this concept of dark figure. Dark figure is a sociological invention from the 19th century, a Belgian sociologist. It's also used in criminality. It basically says that 20 to 40% of all criminal and related activities which are invisible to our legal, criminal justice and wider law enforcement systems. That's a hell of a space for people to carry out crime which is invisible and unseen ever. It really is. It's shocking that it's not a concept that's investigated and foregrounded more in our communities and civilizations. We're finding it difficult enough to chase the crime we can see, but in a digital world, if we go back to Mill's theorem on the first position, in a digital world which is almost entirely malleable, just think how many more opportunities there are now to expand dark figure and neo-crime, crimes which we cannot anticipate on the basis of previous experiences. Just imagine how grand, in a totally negative sense, those opportunities now are. And so we need to create those technologies so that crime fighting, national security, the armed forces and related are able to access levels of creativity on a par with the very worst criminality out there. We don't want the people who keep the peace, we don't want the people who prevent unseen crime with our technologies for them to find it impossible to be as creative as the most creative, or have to pay the most creative knowing that they're criminals, but bringing them over in some way to away from the dark side, and kind of bribing them to be good guys for a while. That's not the way that you run a country. That's not the way that you run a civilization. That's not the way that you run Western democracy, is it? Or is it? So this is position 5 of my 6 positions on IT tech. This one's on secrecy, why we need it again. I think it's probably becoming reasonably clear now where I'm coming from on this one, but let's just go through the slides. So let's have a look at these 3 points here. If we accept that conformity, the fair and just application of rules and laws, thrives in a transparency which in a modern digital world we will get if our tech is transparent too, but then it isn't, what happens then? And if we accept the non-conformity of the criminal kind, the delivery, for example, of neo-crimes in the criminal space that is dark figure, what I described in slide 20, if we accept that this thrives in secrecy, which after 9/11 was how we really logically concluded, acceptably so correctly so, no arguments there. As a consequence of these two things, it's hardly surprising we've spent all our efforts over the past 20 years in eliminating all digital simulacrums that would lead to the creative value out of a big tech pencil and paper. That is to say, what do I mean by big tech pencil and paper? The absolute security of thinking and the total control over sharing. Why? In order to become as creative as those who already do it out with our tech surveillance strategies. Okay, So now to the real downsides as a consequence of the previous slide. Firstly, we have a conformism which needs transparency to really convince. Secondly, we have a nonconformism and connected creativity which only truly thrive in secrecy, for good or ill, both criminals and crime fighters. And then we have the absence of any attempt by big tech to recreate the realities of a millennium-long secrecy positive thought creation tool, that is to say, pencil and paper, which, by the by, led to the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, and universal education. Right, those are the three points that we keep in mind here. The problem with all of that is that a conformism which needs transparency to really convince, we are not transparent in our governance. Politics is, after all about the business of hiding the truth. And you may say this since forever, but our tech certainly doesn't make it any less likely. And yet, we have the problem that whilst our governance is not transparent at all, our security, the day-to-day security, the technologies that we use, we can't be sure who is looking in on us. We can't be confident that anything we think is ours until it's time for us to share it. And so we don't go down those routes of those rabbit holes, which can sometimes be totally productive. Those things which make us uneasy, and those anomalies which we need time and we need the capacity to reflect in order to actually see those anomalies or sense them in the first place. What good detectives do, what good crime fighters do, what good soldiers do on a battlefield. We are too transparent in our crime fighting tools as far as the secrecy positive nature of our ability to think our ways out of these boxes that the criminals put us in. But yeah, we're not transparent at all in the things that are supposed to make sure that the security and stuff has a firm and even backing, foundations and so forth, politics, governance, and all of that. So we have no digital versions of pencil and paper ever, in any circumstances, anywhere. Yes, I do agree. What's beginning to come to your mind now, maybe? We need to be judicious in where and when we consider introducing these new processes. In fact, we need to be much more transparent in governance and politics, because we're talking here about the application of rules, regulations, policies and laws, and that needs to be a totally transparent process for people to actually want to buy into it again, for citizens to want to do so. On the other hand, it is my argument at the same time that in what are the prior thinking processes and so forth, so the ideation of new ways of doing government, even in governance and politics, we deserve to have new creativity-inducing secrecy-positive tools. After all, the job of government is increasingly complex. And if in government this were ultimately judged necessary, how much more so in security and related? Here you have an investor slide deck, secrecy plus solve a complex world. If you're interested, do get in touch with me and I can point you in the direction of it. It's an ongoing piece of work. Okay, my final position of the 6 positions that I've laid out here today is why focus on stopping the bad. So I have spoken a lot lately about using secrecy positive thinking platforms in order to solve big problems, including climate change, which has very little to do with, I mean, it is a risk and security matter, but not a military matter or an espionage matter as per Putin's Russia, Hamas or 9/11. It's a different kind of issue. although it does affect, it is an existential one. You've got some links there which you can click through to if you wish, and you can search the video on YouTube at my channel at Mel Williams. So it is my temperament, my inclination to allow everyone to use new technologies. I believe in a distributed intelligence. I believe in the rule of law and citizen democracy. And for example, climate change has morphed in just 12 months into climate boiling. So there is that. The big problems like climate change, like global warming, they do need increasingly multi-layered solutioning tools to even get close to resolving them. I don't think the traditional startup, with its goal, with its objective, with its aim, with its strategy of simplifying things to the smallest degree, in order to then be able to resolve step by very slow step a bunch of quite serious matters. My argument here actually is, if you haven't seen the video, is that you can't solve a complex problem which only exists in its complexity. If you simplify something down to what you can invoice the customer as soon as possible with, you lose sight of all the other connected items which need to be solved simultaneously in order for any of them to be solved. I think it's self-evident. I don't know if people realize this or understand it, or maybe it's only self-evident to me because I'm wrong. Okay, so that's my natural temperament. My desire would be to create a technology which we then give to everyone or sell to everyone. On the other hand, I'm going to read this one word for word. In light of the societal and workplace fracture and the breakdown of law with the recent uncontrolled release of generative AI technologies, using closed source tools and onto an indiscriminately open domain, I'm just as reluctant as OpenAI and others have been all too eager to indiscriminately upturn the world. And this is my rationale for saying security, law enforcement, the military and espionage first, and maybe first for a very long while too. A bit of a summary here, 2 conclusion slides. IT tech and human primacy, what's broken, and the second slide will be what's fixable. Five points here. Number 1, machines are not seen as tools which function as extensions of human beings, solving big problems that need solving. That's what we would like. Number 2, machines as implemented at the moment solve one problem only: how to deepen the existing deep wallets of big companies. Number 3, they are not designed primarily to solve those big problems which have humans at the center. Number 4, machine goalposts are moved all the time. This is called progress. Yet someone chooses never to define progress in terms of using big tech to move human goalposts. Not ever. Number 5, humans are being automated out of all relevance in the workplace, with technological claims made for big tech platforms that serve only to underline this is a choice of the few over the needs of the many. And so IT tech and human primacy, what we can fix. This, I guess, is probably the most positive slide of the whole 36. We are on 32. what we can fix. Number one, create a relationship between humans and machines that prioritizes the intrinsic capabilities of humans who think, reflect and do over the needs of an elite already wealthy at the expense of that humanity. There's some links there. Some basic tools, a library of things we could deliver quite easily and quite cheaply. Some research into architectures, which I've conducted over the past few years and have summarized in an online white paper there. And then the slide deck on Putin's Russia's terrorist state and primacy and so forth, machine primacy versus human primacy, the history of 9/11 and lately Hamas and so forth. Number two, we should begin to generate the idea, to spread the idea that profit is what benefits society, workforces and other stakeholders, not just what benefits the shareholders. It's not just a matter of Milton Friedman's assertion that the only moral responsibility of a corporation was to its shareholders. It's much more these days anyway. Maybe he would have said something different today in the face of global boiling, climate boiling. Focus the future present, number three, on humans and our needs, including planetary sustainability. This should be the moral purpose of all corporations, not just the benefit corporations either. Redefine and follow up on what we mean by progress. I think this is a key one. We see progress as machines. Why not see it as humans being different from what they were? Better than what they were from generation to generation, actually improving, actually benchmarking ourselves against previous generations and using our tech to enhance ourselves. Not chasing the tail of a kind of silly womb envy that we've got to create things that replace ourselves. Again, we've got some links there. And finally, it's an appeal to everyone, I guess. Ignore the hype, trust human capabilities, love tools and tech. Don't stop doing that, but as extensions of ourselves. Just stop doing the other way around. And this is me. And it's true. I don't want to make us irrelevant in the workplace, and I'd like it to stop happening. That's probably my biggest driver. The workplace and life. Just that.